So starting in 3, 2, 1, go. Hey, welcome in, Villagen. Japanese players typically use the name E, which has fairly good stats for this version of the game. It's a strength HP build similar to what I use on the Game Boy. And in this one I set the text speed to slowest since I can actually reliably control it. In the Game Boy version I will set the text speed to fastest because there's so much lag in the Game Boy that's been added in. It's hard to time exactly when you should be doing the button presses. Plus the little bit of difference in the text between the two versions factors into that as well. Early game shopping is pretty much identical. I'm going to get the club, which is the best early game weapon. Grab the warp wing out of the inn here, as well as do a little bit of shopping for herbs and torches. I'll use the herbs and torches as a way to get to level 2 a little bit faster. Later versions of Dragon Quest, starting I think with Dragon Quest V, let you use consumable items in battle. And so I use those here as the torches in order to do some extra damage for low-level enemies. So there's my 2 herbs. And there's my 2 torches. Now it's very slightly faster to walk out to the right-hand side, but as you see there's this guy that likes to get in your way. In the Super Famicom version, because you've got a little bit more agility, there's less lag in the movement and the turning, you can walk that way and still save time even if he walks down like that. In the Game Boy version, since it takes so long to change directions, it's faster to just walk to the left. That way you never have to worry about running into him. Let's use up one of those torches. Didn't quite kill the ghost, but got him on the second turn. And there's level 2. Level 2 is important just so that I've got an extra buffer of hit points when I'm doing the walk up to Cole here. In the more aggressive speedrun, you'd try to go after a Magidraki like that, so you'd save all your torches and just hope that you could kill the Draki before he kills you. So in Cole here, we need to get the Pixie Flute, and that'll be useful for the Golem later on at Cantlin. We're also going to raid these chests back here in order to get a strength seed and some clothes. Excellent. Got 3 points in my strength seed, which is the best possible result. All the seeds have a 3-point variance, so for strength seeds you're either going to get a 1, 2, or 3. And it doesn't make a huge difference for the overall course of the game, but a 3 means you're more likely to be able to reliably kill the ghosts, whereas a 1 you'd pretty much struggle through and have to do an extra turn on them. Kind of a nasty scorpion that was hard to get away from. Running in this game is entirely RNG based, so it doesn't matter what your level is, doesn't matter what the monster's level is, if running is applicable. Once you get to more than 6 levels higher than the zone target, then you can run away automatically. But if you haven't met that requirement, then the first time you've got a 50% chance of failing, the second time you've got a 25% chance of failing, and then third in successive versions you've got a 12.5 chance of failing. And unlike some of the other games in the series around this time, you can fail to run indefinitely, so there's no guarantee like after the third try you'll always succeed like in Dragon Warrior 3. Now I'm taking the slow walk back to Garenham, and that's because I need to earn level 4 before I can move on to the next area. Level 3 will get me the heal spell, and level 4 will get me the hurt spell, which are both very useful for the early game. And you'll also notice that on the walk around here, I'll be stepping on a lot of forest and mountain tiles. It's because those zone types have a higher encounter rate than the normal plains. So by doing that, I'll get more encounters, which I need for the level grinding here. In the original version on the NES or the Famicom, you actually had a little bit of friction when walking on the mountain tiles. Like your character would stutter and it would take longer to take each step, and that got taken out of the remakes. So it's faster to walk on mountain tiles than any other terrain type if you want to get extra encounters. In this version of the game, I like to do little circles around the mountains here. In the Game Boy version, because it's slower to turn directions, you're pretty much having to walk in straight lines, and so it's better to walk in a horizontal line or a vertical line between the town and the edge of the increase in tile type areas. That should be 1 or 2 more encounters for level 4. And again, there's a mix here of monsters in this zone type. So depending on which ones that you get, it'll take a longer or shorter amount of time to do the leveling. So in this case, I wanted to get as many ghosts as possible since they have the most experience points. Whereas the slimes would give me fewer per battle, and so it would take longer to do the grinding section. So while we're here, I'm going to stay at the inn in order to recover my magic, and that'll let me use all those charges of hurt that we've picked up. I'll have 5 casts of it with the amount of MP that I have. And that'll be enough to get me to level 5, just walking into the next area. I also want to stock up completely on herbs, as well as fill up my inventory with any item. In this case, torches are the cheapest way of doing that. Should be everything. Yep. 6 herbs, which is the maximum you can carry, as well as all of my inventory space is filled up. And I'll be using that to take advantage of a little bit of a glitch in how the chest mechanics work in order to manipulate a rare item drop. So as much as possible I want to get scorpions. They're the best source of XP for using up my cast here. Here's a good one. And as long as I get one or two of those, then I'm pretty much guaranteed to be able to get to level 5 easily in the cave. Now, as I get to the mountain cave itself, it's actually in a lower level zone since it is so close to where the starting castle is. So we'll see us drop down from those more advanced enemies back to the slimes that I was facing at the beginning. There's level 5. I'm also out of magic, so I'll just have to run from everything else on this floor. The next floor down is a significant jump in difficulty, so I'd be running from that anyway. This is one of the early death marches of the run, in fact, where you've got a very high probability of dying going through here, but the rewards are so good it makes up for it in time. Even if you do die, the penalty is relatively light in Dragon Warrior games. You lose half your gold, but you keep all the experience, you keep all the quest progress, so it's mostly just costing you a little bit of time to walk back to wherever it was. And in Dragon Warrior 1, the world is so small that it really doesn't take any time at all to walk to places. So now on level 2, you hear the music get a little bit slower and more somber. That happens throughout the entire game. So the deeper you are in dungeons, every level changes the music a little bit. So here I'm going to get another Strength Seed as well as a Mystic Nut, which increases your magic points. This little area is where the War Ring is. The War Ring is an item that does absolutely nothing. It did nothing in the original version of the game, although there was a lot of myths around various benefits that, increase your critical hit rate or something. And once people got a chance to analyze the code and break it apart, they found out there was absolutely nothing using it except for one line of dialogue. So right there I got the Iron Shield, which is the second best shield in the game. That's part of the reason why I go to this cave very early. It basically doubles my defense. There's a good example of how you can keep failing for quite a while. That was a relatively rare run to have 4 fail runs in a row. And here's what we came for. This chest has a common drop, which is a torch, and a rare drop, which is the Death Necklace. And the Death Necklace is worth quite a lot of gold. So we're going to manipulate this chest by opening it over and over again. So there we got the Death Necklace. And that's a 1 in 32 drop chance. So because I had a full inventory, it let me see what was in the chest before deciding whether to take the item or not. And I could refuse, And every time I refuse, it'll regenerate the item because it's frame based on when you open it as opposed to when you enter the dungeon or something like that for the contents. But now that we've gotten the necklace, we're going to warp out of here. Usually it only takes 1 or 2 battles in order for the monsters at this level to kill me, and that's the fastest way of walking back to town. You'll see quite a few death warps throughout the game. And whenever you're in the castle here, it's usually faster to use a warp wing or cast return than to walk all the way back out. It's less true than for the Game Boy version, just because that version has more lag and is slower to do it. But even on the Super Famicom version, it's beneficial to use warps in places. So this cave here is the Swamp Cave. We'll be taking the short path through here for the first trip. But later on I'll be spending quite a lot of time going back and forth through this. This is where the princess that was captured at the beginning of the game is being held. The Game Boy version has a nice animated cutscene that shows the princess being taken away by the Dragon Lord's forces. But in the Super Famicom version, they just drop you right into the action. The cutscene was later added on in that, I guess, second remake of the game. So coming up on Rimmildar here is the first opportunity that I have to get keys. A lot of areas in the game are blocked off until you have your first key, and then it becomes a little bit easier to get additional keys once you've got the very first one. I would also take time to do grinding if I hadn't gotten level 6 so early. Let's just run from this guy. So part of the reason why I got the Death Necklace, so I mentioned kind of that Iron Shield was being a great reason to go to the Mountain Cave, but here's where I'm going to actually use the Death Necklace. It sells for 1,200 gold, and that allows me to jump right up to one of the better swords in the game. This guy back here is the key seller, so you have to know to walk around the town to his little secret area. I also picked up a defense seed while I was back there. That right there was Nuts of Life, which are the HP equivalent of the seeds. So those are random between 4 and 6. And getting those is one of the better ones to have high rolls on. So I got a 6 there, which is the best you can get. So I'm pretty happy about that. Okay. So we'll sell the Death Necklace. Going to sell our club, which allows us to auto-equip the weapon that I'm going to purchase here, and that'll be the Steel Sword. Now, previously what I would do is just move on and buy the chain armor in the next town, but I can get a better upgraded version of that, the iron armor, if I stay here. And for marathon safety, that's the route I'm going to take. Turns out to not cost all that much time as well, so it's well worth it. Basically, it gives me 6 extra points of defense using cash that would otherwise be wasted. And that 6 points of defense makes the runs to the golem be a little bit safer, as well as the golem fight itself. Fortunately, the area right outside of Rimildar is relatively good for grinding as well. The enemies here not only give pretty good gold, but also experience. So this will let me get up to level 7 here, and level 8 while I'm in Garen's Grave. My target's going to be 1,000 gold, which is pretty much exactly what I need for that armor. So that usually takes 2 trips worth of magic. And as I get low, you'll see me kind of walk closer to the towns to make sure that I can get back to the inn in time. Dragon Warrior's got a very small minimum step window. You can get a battle 2 steps after your previous one. It's unlikely though, but it can happen. Basically the way that encounter rates work is your first step you're guaranteed not to be in a battle. Second step, it's a very low odd compared to the tile type that you're on. And then over your successive steps, it'll increase in odds until it kind of maxes out about twice your typical average. And that threat counter builds while you're walking around in towns and other places without any encounters at all. Or if you're using the repel spell or things like that. So that's why if you exit towns or have been walking around with repel for a while, you'll notice that it's very likely the first step or a couple of steps afterwards you'll get an encounter. And it's because you've built up that threat over time. In the Game Boy version, it actually tells me on the main HUD how much gold I have, so I don't have to be guessing as much. In this version, I'm kind of trying to track it in my head about how many battles that I've been in. Because roughly, you're getting about 50 gold for each of the encounters here. Welcome in, Empty Hooligan. So in this case, I was just short of my 1,000 target. And so I have to go out for probably one extra battle here. So I'm going to sell the clothes that I picked up in coal, and then buy the iron armor here. And I always sell before buying because that causes it to auto-equip the item instead of having me to go to the inventory. So now that we've got the key, we can go raid the treasury here in Tentacle. We're getting a couple of seeds here. We get our key back, which is nice, as well as a little bit of gold. Here's the key vendor in the castle here. You can only get to him if you already have a key. And that's kind of why you have to go all the way over to Rimuldar to bootstrap this process. And I don't need the Stones of Sunlight yet, which is this item that's hidden in the area over here. But the old guy has another Nut of Life in his dresser there. And so I want to get those extra HP early on. And it doesn't make sense to come back here for a second trip. Now he blocks me in and wants to give me a long spiel about history and saving the world and stuff, so I just warp out of there. It's not as big of a time difference in the Japanese version like this, but in the US Game Boy version, because the text is much slower, you actually save like 15 seconds by warping out. So that quick check was to see whether or not I had a torch already. You can get a torch right there, although sometimes that guy wandering around blocks them in this version. In the Game Boy version, the NPCs don't move around, and so you don't have to worry about being blocked in on things. Yeah, there's a couple of different remakes of this game. After the NES and Famicom versions came out, the first remake was for the Super Famicom, which is the version I'm playing right now, and that was only released in Japan. After that one, they did remakes again, which are very similar to this one, for the Game Boy Color, and that came out both in Japan and the US. So if you are an English speaker, you probably want to be playing the Game Boy version. It's the easiest one to get into. It still has all the nice improvements. But this Super Famicom version is definitely the best version overall of this game. And they actually made improvements between all the different versions. The Famicom for the original Japanese audience was fairly limited because it was a very early Nintendo release game. And so a lot of things that we would take for granted for RPGs didn't exist in that one. So they didn't have battery backup, for example. Instead, you got a password that you used to recreate your characters. It wasn't until Dragon Warrior 3 that they had batteries, in fact. You also only faced one direction, so they didn't have multiple sets of graphics for things. That meant when you wanted to talk to somebody, it would actually open up a menu asking what direction that you wanted to talk in, because it couldn't tell, did you want to go up or to the left or what, since you were always going to be facing the same way. And the US audiences are probably more familiar with the NES version of the game, which, because it was a later release, could take advantage of more features of the cartridges, and that just made it a smoother experience overall. But definitely for both of the remakes, either the Super Famicom or the Game Boy version, it has dramatically reduced the amount of grinding in the game, as you'll see kind of throughout this run. It just kind of polished a lot of the rough edges. So I'm going into this dungeon for the Silver Harp, and that's a quest item that I'll need later in the game. It also allows me to instantly get into battle, and we'll see how many battles I survive. This will just be some extra grinding to get up to at least close to level 9, if possible. And in the original version of the game, you'd always get kind of a crummy set of monsters, like it was based on one of the early default areas. Yeah, you're not worth fighting. Whereas in the remakes, it actually gives you a level-appropriate set of monsters. We'll just go on without level 9. It's pretty rare that I actually get up to it, and you either want to be very close to level 9 or very far away from it in terms of the overall grinding. We'll see if we can get one more monster out of here. Looks like this one will be able to finish this off, and that'll be the Death Warp back out of here. Assuming he doesn't just sit there and cast heal. And after we leave Garen's grave, we have another death run over to the Golem. And for people that are familiar with the game, the golem is guarding the castle town of Cantlin, so you can't get in there until you beat this really high-level monster. It's also very deep in the game. It's one of the last things that you get to in the overworld. But in the remakes, they gave the golem a ton of experience, so he's well worth fighting as early as possible to avoid having to do a lot of grinding. Now at level 8 I probably have about a 60% chance of successfully making it to the golem as well as beating him. If I get to the golem, then I've got a pretty good shot because I've got the fairy flute, which puts him to sleep guaranteed. But I have to get through some really high level monsters in order to get there first. Now one technique that's possible in speedruns, which is a different category, but I'm not going to be doing it in the marathon, is to manipulate what monsters that you get in the overworld by being frame exact in your movements and then using the silver harp to get the right encounter. And that's used to do grinding on the metal slimes down at the south edge of the world. Like I said, that's actually tracked as a separate category, so you've got runs both with and without those type of techniques. So from this point on is where it gets really difficult. So I'm going to start getting into some successively tougher and tougher zones. You'll see me kind of hugging the edge of these gray mountains. That's to keep into a zone that's slightly low level as long as I can, although it's still pretty nasty monsters in here. Difference is the monsters in the low-level zone take 3 rounds to kill me instead of 2. Because I'm not using RNG manipulation, it'd be extremely improbable for me to take out a metal slime, although it would save quite a bit of time if I managed to get it. We're like 2 steps short of the golem. Whew, got away. So as you can see, the golem does a whole lot of damage. But one of the reasons I got those life nuts was so I'd have enough life left over after the hits to survive. And for as long as possible, I'm going to try to do 2 attacks per flute. It's only safe to do 1 attack per flute, but that's why I healed beforehand. And doing 2 hits per round is a little bit faster because every time that you're alternating with this song to put him back to sleep, it does take as much time as a lot of combat. And we're in need of doing about 16 hits on him. I didn't think that they changed that between the NES version and the remakes. Basically, what happens is he's 100% guaranteed to be put to sleep, but it follows the normal mechanics of a sleeping monster being woken up. And now that he's broken out of the 2 hits per round, we're going to alternate between 1 use of the flute and 1 attack. And here's the reason why we do this golem so early. 2,500 experience points is multiple levels. Otherwise, you'd be probably doing like 40 or 50 minutes worth of grinding in order to get an equivalent amount and be able to move on in the game. Because there's not a lot that you can safely tackle at that earlier level. Whereas now that I'm level 11, I'll be able to take advantage of another mechanic change in this game in order to quickly get some experience. So here we are in Cantlin. I'm going to store a bunch of items so that I can free up inventory space. Give you tools. 1 key, 2 keys. Let's give you 3 keys. I only need to do 2 keys in this version of the game. But I give her just as many keys as I can. Because in the Game Boy version, you actually use more keys than in this one due to some route changes. This has been a long time since I did a Super Famicom run. So I think it was like 2 tries of the golem, plus also some big route differences. I originally thought I had to be a lot more conservative in order to have a marathon safe route. But I've since come up with a couple of things that let me do it quite a bit quicker without impinging on safety at all. So there we fill back up on keys. Get another Mystic Nut to increase our MP again. And here's where I'm going to stock up on fairy water or repellents, depending on what version of the game that you play. This basically acts as the repel spell, so I don't have to deal with all those pesky overworld encounters. I think the music is a little bit more mellow and orchestral in this version. So I do like the town music because it goes pretty well. But some of the other ones are kind of laid back compared to what you want to have in a video game. Unless you're playing it like really late at night. So here's where I'm going to be doing my second bit of grinding that's mechanic based. Basically, they made the green dragon that's guarding the princess really buffed up compared to the normal dragons. But they also gave him some bonus experience to boot. And so I'm going to take advantage of the fact that if you fail to complete the princess quest, you can actually repeat this again and again because they only store one flag for what the state is. And in this version, you do have to pick up the princess. That's actually a change between the Super Famicom and Game Boy version. She says blush out loud. It's just Poe instead of the word blush, but it's exactly the same text and dialogue between here. So what must be done is that this princess must be dropped to the swamp. And I use these death warps as a way to reset the dragon's presence back in the cave. And so for that reason I want to be finishing those dragon fights with as little HP as possible. Both so it takes fewer steps as well as also so that I don't have to worry about recasting Repel. And this dragon grinding is going to be our main way of getting experience for the mid-game. So basically we're going to go from level 11 up to 16 through this method. We have to do a bunch of questing in between, so it's not all going to be sitting there at the dragon, but that'll be the primary vehicle. There's also two equally lengthy routes to get there, so you can decide whether I go to the right or down. Makes no difference for time. Enemies are going to depend on the exact monster type. Some of them are completely normal. Some of them cannot get preemptive attacks, and other ones can. I remember one being surprised by was that the golem can get preemptives. I was not expecting that. Oh, Kaishin, that's an excellent move in this version. And unfortunately it came at the very end, so now I've got a ton of HP left over. Hey there, Carpet Crawler. So there's our second princess. The king's got just a ton of daughters. It wasn't pictured in the introduction, but they actually kidnapped like a whole slew of them, and so they've all been living in the cave here together. So you might feel bad about dropping princesses in the swamp, but their successors and the future daughters and their sisters are all just lined up in there. Now that I'm level 13, I also get the nice return spell. And in this version of the game, return helpfully drops you to the left side of the castle, which is easy to get to wherever you want to go. In the Game Boy version, it puts you below the castle. So you have to walk all the way around and take extra steps in order to do anything. So I much like the difference in favor of the Super Famicom version for that. You can navigate these caves in the dark. They're fairly simple, and you get a nice bonking sound when you run into walls so that you know where you are. But the amount of times you get lost even once outweighs casting light every time through. Plus, for a marathon, the viewers probably want to see where you're going. Another excellent move on the last hit. Those things are fairly rare. It's 1 in 64 to have the critical hits. So we're going to be just short of level 14 here, which is not a big deal. It's because I got less grinding in the Silver Harp Cave than I typically do. This is what the walk looks like when I don't have any rappels. I'm going to get another stock of them after this trip. But you can see the time difference from turning off enemy encounters. Even though I'm going to be guaranteed to run away from these, and they're relatively short, you just get so many in a typical walk that it adds up over time. In this version, the dragon sprite's kind of this cute little puppy as well. The Game Boy has a more fearsome and imposing one. It actually takes up like 4 blocks of tiles. And this right here is a slight change that I've made recently to the route. It's a little bit faster if you're going to be getting the fairy water to not do the death warp here, but to actually kill yourself in Tanagle Castle. So I think this is the closest we can get to taunting the princess in the version. We're going to take her home, we're taking her home, we're in the castle, we're walking up to where she's staying. You take a quick detour, buy some keys, you know. Wouldn't want to go home without those. Let's go talk to this guy down here. We haven't seen all the guards yet. Oh, we dropped the princess in the castle. I'm assuming whatever that lightning barrier stuff is going to be pretty fatal to princesses as well. And that's pretty good, because I think it's like 7 HP per step instead of the 1 HP of the swamps. But that's okay, we're going to get more princesses back, so it all works out in the end. You know, I'm just waiting for the one that doesn't say blush out loud, because that's just kind of creepy. So there's level 14. Level 14 doesn't have any spells associated with it, which is the only one in this region that's like that. But it does start the beginning of the really big level up territory. Basically, there is a flat section where you're not getting much in stat growth with your levels early on. And then in the mid-teens, it starts turning into this really fast curve. And so that's one of the reasons why there are very hard level targets for the end game, is because otherwise you're just going to be so overpowered by the enemies you can't even survive for very long. But you get like 1 or 2 level ups and it totally flips around. And I'm timing these repels so that I get pretty much the maximum amount of walking without the dialog box popping up. Because if you go 64 steps and it actually expires, then it'll take like a second or two to tell you, hey, you've run out of repel. Whereas if you stop one step before, it just saves a little bit of time cumulatively across the run. A lot of these dragon fights I could be cutting one round shorter just by not doing the heal as aggressively in there. At this point, you got like a 97 or so % chance of going before the dragon in combat, just based on your agility. But I figure for marathon safety, I will probably not try to push them. It only costs like 4 minutes if I do fail one, but it kind of looks bad. So this princess will get us to level 15, and that's where we get the repel spell, so I won't have to use these repellent items anymore. I'll be able to cast it very cheaply on my own. Most of the top level ones do the first couple of Ks in the dark, but they actually do these dragon runs with the lights on. So you'll see them in the dark for like the Mountain Cave and Garen's Grave. And they'll probably be in the dark for the walk to Rimeldar, because that's a little bit easier to navigate than it is to get to the dragon. The only one that saves significant time is the Mountain Cave, because you can take a different order of the chests, basically get the Death Necklace first, instead of doing what I do and get the Death Necklace last, if you're in the dark. I actually wanted to do the Death Warp before doing this. Oh well, that's not too bad. Okay. The reason I have to come back here is to pull all those items out of the bank that I stored in Cantlin. But I was supposed to drop the princess off beforehand, so we'll just use that same technique that we did before with the key merchant here. And that doesn't cost as much time as walking to a swamp to kill yourself or to find monsters that at this level could take you down. Plus the king doesn't seem to care that I'm stacking up dead bodies in his castle. This Tohiro spell here is the repel equivalent. And you'll see the pop up there because that's my item repel wearing out. But they have a different set of counters for the item and the spell. So my spell one is still going on its 64 steps. This segment that I'm doing right here is a little bit different than what you'll typically see in a Japanese run. It's because I'm doing the strategy that I would normally be doing for the Game Boy version. And what they would do is actually do some of this grinding at level 15. Basically, they get the Lotus armor first and then do grinding in the swamp down there, which I will do starting at level 16. The primary reason for the difference is because on the Japanese version it takes a little bit longer since you have to talk to the princess and pick her up for each of these trips. And so the break-even of when it's faster to do the dragon or whether it's faster to do normal random encounters changes because of that. But it's like a really small factor at this level. So only 2 more dragons to go. Then we'll be at level 16 and we'll have to take on the jerk known as the Mad Knight in the US version. Thank you, Candy Cloud. Hope you are around again in the future. Be plenty of Dragon Warrior and Final Fantasy this week as we prepare for Limit Break. Other RPGs of assorted sorts coming as well. And with the extra level, plus like the defense from the dragon skill, we're now buff enough to just tank that dragon without any healing at all most of the time. In fact, at later levels, if you keep trying to grind on him, it starts becoming a problem of how you actually take enough damage to make this process efficient. And so you typically do that by like taking off your armor to do the fight. Trip will be one of the few times where I can successfully deal with having a really high HP, because I'm going to actually do some questing afterwards before my death warp. Excellent move. Very good timing for it as well. So there's level 16, and if you didn't see the text go by, we got 21 magic points, which is a huge jump in our reservoir of spells. We don't have the one key spell that's going to be necessary for beating the game, which is Heal More, or Behoimi in this version, but we'll get that at level 17. So at some point there is a plot to this game. We never got really introduced to it because they just kind of throw you right into the action. But there's a bunch of fetch questing that goes on in order to build the key item necessary to get to the final castle. In this case, I need to trade in that silver harp that I got for the Staff of Rain. And I'll use that to build the last piece that I need. I'm going to beat the game at level 18. The world record speedruns go for level 17. It's like a 5 to 10% chance of successfully doing that. So for marathon runs, the most practical one is going to be 18. At that point, I can get like maybe a 60 to 70% chance of success. And at level 19, it becomes almost a guarantee. So we haven't been down here in a while. This was back to that original run we did really early in the game over to the Golem. I'm going to let my repel run out because once I get across that bridge, I'm not going to be high enough level to keep the monsters away. But unlike last time, where I was fighting to run away for my life, I can actually fight these things and grind here effectively. There's so many differences between the NES version and the remakes. It just happens coincidentally to work out for the levels. Um, like they've seriously buffed both versions of the Dragon Lord. He's got like twice as many hit points, and he also has a bunch of nasty spells. And it just so happens that the addition of the seeds to increase your stats perfectly cancels that out. So like I said, this guy's a jerk. He casts Sleep. I'm going to hope it does not work. Or that he just doesn't use it. Either one's good. And it didn't work. So there's... Oops. Erdrick's Armor, or Loto in this version. I'm going to throw away the Iron Armor just so I don't accidentally put it on. And from this point in the game, there are version differences that are significant enough to impact the route. You'll notice that I'm walking a half-step tile every time I move forward. That's because there's two animations for the character. Internally in the NES version, it's two half steps as well. They didn't show the graphics for it. When they did the Game Boy remakes, they turned it into full tile movement. And they adjusted all of the probabilities of monster encounters so you get the same number of encounters more or less as you're walking along. But what they didn't adjust in the Game Boy version was the recovery rate of Erdrick's Armor. So in this version, I get a hit point back every time I take one of those half steps. But in the Game Boy version, I'd only get a hit point back every full step. And so my ability to go indefinitely in the wilderness is greatly reduced. And that causes you to have to be a much higher level to get around to certain places in that version of the game. And what you'll see is that if everything goes well, I'm never going to put this princess down, and we're going to finish the game on this trip. Well, after I drop her in this swamp, of course. So let's say one more princess, and then I'm done with them. Come on, you. There's Lotus Seal. And now I'm going to grind in this area on these mountains up to level 17. I'm actually going to go a little bit past 17 just for safety on that. But you'll basically see that as I'm walking along, I recover so much HP between battles that I almost don't have to do any recovery at all. This grinding is, at this level, about equally efficient in the Game Boy version and more efficient in the Super Famicom version, just because of the difference in time it takes talking to the princess in the Dragon Grind. Whenever my HP gets a little bit low, what I'll do is actually walk up on these grass squares, since it's got a slightly lower encounter rate, and that helps me stretch between battles how long I go, so that I never have to go into the menu, hopefully, to cast heal. Sadly, these wandering dragons are quite a bit weaker and quite a bit less lucrative than their cousin in the swamp cave. There is a dragon in Charlotte Castle, the red dragon or Darth dragon in this version, who's worth 350 experience points, which is about a third of the swamp cave dragon. And in the NES version, that was a really nasty guy because he casts sleep on you. In this version, they replace sleep with stop spell, and that makes him much weaker. Should be getting pretty close to level 17 now. The experience curve actually flattens out in this game, so you have kind of an increasing amount of experience between each level, but once you hit level 18 it caps at 4,000 experience between levels. So at that point, you know, it's really easy to just grind up as high as you want to, although for casual play I wouldn't recommend going past like 21 or 22. At that point the games just kind of get silly and easy. And grading this area is particularly good because these are also the same monsters that are in the final approach to Charlock. It's not quite as good as being in Charlock itself, but that requires some additional questing as well as a lot more walking to get there. This is pretty much the best area on the overworld to get easy access to for doing this. There's level 17. I go about 5 battles past it. It's kind of arbitrary. I'm trying to make a guess about how much experience I'm going to gain in Charlock in a typical trip without having to do extra grinding on the Dragon Lord's floor. Because I'll be doing my actual gain to level 18 in Charlock itself just before I get to the final battle. So one more and then I'll do a Death Warp out of here. And that lets me put the Princess down and get another 950 experience in the final walk to Charlock. The enemies do enough damage that it's much faster than taking your armor off and walking in the swamp. It's just to let them kill you by using an item that doesn't do anything over and over again in battle. Okay. So I've got 3,400 experience points to go. I'll get 950 in the Swamp Cave. I'll probably get like 200 or 300 in the walk down to build the Rainbow Drop. And the rest of it's going to be in Charlock itself. There's a couple of monsters in there that are less good to fight. I'm going to hope that I don't get very many Stone Golems, as few Death Knights and Mad Knights as possible. I would like to get as many dragons as I can because they're generally good. The red dragon is the rarest encounter on those 2 floors, so it's bad luck to not get any, although in a typical run you might get 1 or so. It's one of those things where there's so few samples in any particular trip, like you're not going to have that many fights overall in a particular run, which means you can have a lot of variability between different attempts. This game, because you take half-tile steps, you can actually go out of the dungeon and back in without walking on any of the swamp tiles. In the Game Boy version, you have to take at least 1 full step off. Now, it doesn't matter for me because I've got Lodo's armor on, which makes me immune to swamps and energy barriers. But it's just a little difference that can very slightly impact some of the gameplay and routing for your step choices. And I have to say, after having played the Game Boy version quite a lot, it's so refreshing going back to the Super Famicom version because it actually feels like you're responsively moving and the controls are doing something. The Game Boy's got just a bunch of lag walking around on the map, and it makes it feel like it's underwater. Cool. But here we got the final quest item, which is the Rainbow Drop. And that'll let me get into Charlotte Castle itself by building the Rainbow Bridge. The Rainbow Bridge is one of the few things where I say the Game Boy version is superior, because it's got a really cool bucket of rainbow pouring down from the sky to form the bridge. In this version, it just kind of pulses in light, and then suddenly there's a bridge there. Make sure I've got keys. As long as I've got keys, I can skip the key seller in this village. I still need to stock up on herbs and a torch, though, so that I don't have to use any magic in the walk through Charlock. The final battle is very tight, and so you have to have every possible cast of Healmore that you could possibly get. Even then, sometimes it's not enough if you get bad luck in the battle. And this whole next bit is the biggest deviation between the Game Boy and Super Famicom in terms of routes, because I'm going to go through and try to do Charlock in a single trip, getting both Erdrick's Sword and finishing the game without having to exit. It's theoretically possible to do that with the Game Boy, but so very unlikely that I actually plan for doing 2 trips through. And I actually have exactly enough MP to do 12 casts of Healmore. And that's with average luck on the Mystic Nuts. I think if I get all bad results, I'd only be able to do 11 casts, and that would be bad. So here we are in Charlock. This is very different in layout from the NES version. The NES was a little bit more of a puzzle type layout where you had lots of stairs up and down. In this one, it's more straightforward and linear, but much longer. The second spell he used on me was Stop Spell, and I absolutely do not care for any of these random encounters for the most part if they use Stop Spell. It's typically a free turn for me. My HP was low enough there that I had to dip into my bag of herbs. I want to do that as infrequently as possible. Fortunately, because of the double healing rate from my perspective of Lodo's armor, it makes it much more likely that I'll be able to recover between battles. Good example of birds being jerks. He dodged twice and cast Heal More on himself in that battle. So that was a really good round for the Star Wyverns. That's a more typical one. These dragons have both a regular attack and a fire breath. The fire breath actually does a lot less damage, so I hope they use it. It's because the Erdrick's armor cuts fire breath attacks in half, and that's intended to make the Dragon Lord fight survivable with the armor, but ridiculously hard without it. Halfway through my herb supply. Gets a little safer once I get Erdrick's sword because I'll be sometimes doing one less round of combat, but also I'll be fighting tougher monsters for the most part. So there we get the sword. And the reason it looks like I lost a bunch of time on that split was because I actually did the grinding before going in here. In the run I'm comparing against, I did the grinding after. And I also did 2 trips, so I will save a ton of time if things go well on the Dragon Lord fight. Stone Golems are pretty easy if you've got the MP to cast Sleep on them, but they do a bunch of damage with their fist attacks, and so if you can't spare the MP, then it's better to run away from them. Now, on this bottom floor, I'm hoping for one red dragon to take care of everything, probably. Otherwise, I'll have to try to get things like the Druid Lords in order to get up to level 18. Got a little bit of time before I get to the Dragon Lord, though. Those guys are really bad news. They're one of the hardest monsters in the game. Well, made it here without getting to 18. Let's see how close we are. 130 points away, so pretty much... Well, maybe not anything, but most things would be enough to get me to 18. It just has to be something that is relatively safe to fight. $10 points short. Well, now really almost anything in the game would be enough. Oh, and we finally get the red dragon. This is what I was hoping for like the previous floor. We'll stand directly in front of him. Use the herb to get to full. And have our nice conversation. You'll actually see me give the Dragon Lord half the world in the Game Boy version, just so that I get a free warp back out of here. In this version, we're going to fight him. And I have to hope that I have generally good luck in order for this to work at level 18. We'll keep going. I'm trying to time it so that I get the best use I can out of my Heal Moors, but he also has the Heal More spell. Got an excellent move there. He's using a lot of heals. Out of magic, I'm just gonna have to go for it. And he goes down. So there is an RNG manipulation in there. Well, it's not really manipulation, but it's knowing what his pattern is like to use your spells most effectively. He has a 4-round cycle. And basically the first round, he's going to do his heavy attack. Second round, he's going to do his medium attack. Third round, he's going to do his light attack. And then fourth round, it's random whether he's going to do his medium or light again. And so I've got breakpoints for where I want to be casting heal versus attacking him. But unless he gives me a couple of light attacks or I get good luck in terms of the order between which the two of us go in, I could use up all of my heals before I get through his HP. Since this is the Japanese version, I'm going to time to the end. But thank you guys for watching.